Bold Robert Emmet, the darling of Erin, bold Robert Emmet will die with a smile. Farewell, companions, both loyal and daring. I'll lay down my life for the Emerald Isle. Welcome to the 2020 commemoration of Robert Emmet's execution and dying on behalf of Ireland. We regret that we are not able to have an open public ceremony this year, but we are very grateful to the National Park Service for allowing us to proceed with a limited ceremony, and we are also very grateful to the Smithsonian American Art Museum for its regular maintenance of the statue, which occurred again this week, so that it should be gleaming behind me as I speak. This year, the commemoration happens to fall on the exact date of Robert Emmet's execution, September 20th, 2017. Excuse me. We are also very pleased to welcome Ambassador Daniel Mulhall, who has now served in America for 3 years. I will introduce him in a few moments, but we appreciate his taking the time to come and join us today. The basic facts of Robert Emmet's life and death are quite well documented. He was born appropriately during the American Revolution. In fact, in March of 1778, when George Washington's army was still encamped at Valley Forge during the Revolutionary War. This is important because Emmet was inspired throughout his life by the example of Washington and the American Revolution, as we will hear in the first reading, the first excerpt from his speech in a few moments. At the age of 25, Emmet led an ill-fated revolution against the British Crown. He was based in Ireland, and the plot was quite quickly uncovered through betrayal, as well as an unexpected explosion of some of the munitions that Emmet and his comrades had acquired. Emmet fled Dublin. Some of the comrades were rounded up by the British authorities immediately, but Emmet fled Dublin, went down to the Wicklow Hills to hide out for a bit. However, he returned to Dublin in order to be with the love of his life, Sarah Curran. While returning to Dublin, his hideout was discovered. He was quickly arrested and brought before the British authorities. He was tried in an all-day trial on September 19th, 1803, quickly convicted and sentenced to hang, and the execution was carried out the next day. No chance of appeals in that situation, obviously. He stood in the dock for 12 hours on September 19th. He was not allowed to get anything to eat. He was not even allowed to relieve himself. And yet, after those 12 hours, he delivered what is considered the most iconic and inspirational speech in the history of Irish republicanism. As I say, we will hear some of that speech in a little bit. This statue behind me was erected in honor of Robert Emmet in 1917, but it was originally in the Smithsonian American Art Museum, then the National History Museum, downtown. In 1966, it was relocated to this beautiful small park, and last year, Congress passed legislation renaming this park, formerly Reservation 302, as Robert Emmet Park. And we are very grateful to Congress and also to the Irish Embassy and the Ambassador for working with Congress and working with us to get that legislation through both houses of Congress. Why is Robert Emmet still relevant today? I think there are two reasons. One is that his inspiring speech from the dock continues to inspire Irish patriots worldwide, just as Lincoln's Gettysburg Address is still relevant to the American promise of freedom then Robert Emmet's speech is equally important to the Irish aspiration for eventually a perfect freedom. But it is also relevant because, in fact, Robert Emmet's epitaph cannot be written. 6 counties in the north of Ireland are not yet free and independent. And we were all delivered a very, very harsh reminder of that just 2 weeks ago. The British government told the European Union that it intends to unilaterally and intentionally breach the international treaty that it has signed with the European Union. They did that in order to maintain an iron hold on the 6 northern counties in Ireland. Notwithstanding, those 6 counties voted very overwhelmingly to stay in the European Union, and notwithstanding that the British latest move seriously jeopardizes not only the economy and the peace in Northern Ireland, but also threatens it raises the specter of a border going up again between the Republic of Ireland and the northern 6 counties. And so Emmet's epitaph indeed cannot be written yet. It is still relevant, and that is why we hold this commemoration every year, in order to honor his sacrifice and to uphold his vision for the future of the island of Ireland. I'm now going to ask Rich Lyon, a board member of the Irish American Unity Conference, to come forward and read an excerpt from Emmet's speech, which demonstrates his inspiration by the American Revolution.
I wish to procure for my country the guarantee which Washington procured for America, to procure an ally, an aid, which by its example would be as important as its valor, disciplined, gallant, pregnant with science and experience, that of a people who would perceive the good and polish the rough points of our character. They would come to us as strangers and leave us as friends, after sharing in our perils and elevating our destiny. These were my objects, not to receive new taskmasters, but to expel old tyrants. It was for these ends I sought aid from France, because France, even as an enemy, could not be more implacable than the enemy already in the bosom of my country.
Thank you, Rich. Bill Black, another member of the IAUC board, will now read the stirring conclusion to Emmet's speech from the dock.
Thank you. These are Robert Emmet's last words in public before he was executed. I have but a few more to say. I am going to my cold and silent grave. My lamp of life is nearly extinguished. My race is run. The grave opens to receive me, and I sink into its bosom. I have but one request to ask at my departure from this world. It is the charity of its silence. Let no man write my epitaph, for as no man who knows my motives dare now vindicate them, let not prejudice or ignorance asperse them. Let them and me repose in obscurity and peace, and my tomb remain uninscribed, until other times and other men can do justice to my character. When my country takes her place among the nations of the earth, then and not till then, let my epitaph be written. I have done.
Bill, it is now my great pleasure to introduce Ireland's ambassador to the United States, the Honorable Daniel Mulhall. Ambassador Mulhall took up this position 3 years ago and has been an avid supporter of this event and the IAUC and Irish America writ large. The ambassador has traveled, at least until the coronavirus epidemic, has traveled extensively throughout the United States to not only promote Ireland's interests, not only to share in our festivities, our festivals, and other events, but also to listen to Irish America, to better understand what we are concerned about and what we like to celebrate. He has done this tirelessly. He has also participated in numerous forums and other events to share his thoughts and observations on various issues which are important to Irish America as well as important to Ireland, because after all, what's important to Ireland is important to Irish America. And he has enthusiastically, I should say, he has enthusiastically embraced Irish America with his whole heart as well as his whole mind. And it has re-energized Irish America. He followed in a wonderful ambassador's difficult footsteps. Ambassador Ann Anderson was very engaged in Irish America as well. Ambassador Mulhall has picked up that torch and, if at all possible, carried it even further. And we appreciate very much his involvement, his enthusiasm. And so with that, I should mention, the ambassador is also very active on social media. He tweets regularly and he tweets poems. He has a keen interest in literature, not only poetry, but also other literature. And he has written extensively. He has written books and he has written articles for various journals. So again, without any further ado, I do want to welcome the ambassador to this program today.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you all for being here. It's a shame we can't be here in the traditional format with a large crowd gathered here to celebrate the legacy of Robert Emmet. I'm a historian by training, so I've got a huge interest in the history of Ireland and the 19th and 20th centuries in particular, which is my specialty. And I suppose that starts with the revolution of 1798, in which Robert Emmet's brother, Thomas Addis Emmet, was involved. And you know, what I think about Emmet now, in the current context that we find ourselves in, is that he connects us with Europe and with America. Because remember, Robert Emmet wouldn't have organized his rebellion in 1803 had it not been for the American Revolution of a generation before. It was that legacy that inspired a generation of Irish people to believe that an Irish Republic could be created along the lines of what happened in America in the 1770s and 1780s. And then the second thing that was a backdrop to Robert Emmet's rebellion was the French Revolution of 1789, which again inspired many people all over Europe to believe that a different kind of world was possible, that you could create a new world that didn't rely on monarchs and nobles lording it over the ordinary people, but that you could have a republican ethos that could create a different and better society for all mankind. So it was those two events in the late 18th century, the American and French revolutions, that inspired Robert Emmet and a generation to which Robert Emmet belonged. And then what I've discovered over the last 3 years is the extent to which Robert Emmet in the 19th century became iconic for Irish Americans. There were Emmet societies in places like Savannah going back to the 1840s. It meant that for Irish Americans trying to establish themselves in this new land, but also wanting to connect back to their homeland, saw Robert Emmet as a figure that they could rally round, that they could celebrate, who represented the patriotic strain that they carried with them across the Atlantic, and which continues to be evident in America to this very day. And last week, we saw a very good example of how Irish American members of Congress were active in pushing back against a decision taken in London that could jeopardize the Northern Ireland Protocol, and thus the Good Friday Agreement. And that was a demonstration, if you like, of the legacy of Robert Emmet and the fact that he inspired generations of Irish Americans to maintain an active interest in the affairs of Ireland, and that active interest continues to this very day. Ireland today is a country that is very comfortable in its European identity. Our European identity in no way detracts or subtracts from our Irish identity. Irish identity is as strong as it's ever been. And there are many examples of that. Our music is as strong as it's ever been. Our native language, I believe, is actually strengthening again, as we have now many people who are going through their schooling entirely through Irish. Our own native games are thriving, although hugely challenged, of course, like all sports are, by the circumstances of the pandemic. So overall, our identity is as strong as it's ever been. And we're also comfortable about being part of a wider enterprise designed to create conditions of peace, stability, security and prosperity across the European continent. And of course there are many challenges facing the EU at the moment, with issues to do with with Russia, issues to do with the rise of populism around Europe, economic challenges clearly from the pandemic. But nonetheless, there's a strong belief that Europeans need to band together in order to face the challenges of the future. And Ireland is actually well placed as a country that has ties of kith and kin with the United States, but is also firmly embedded as a member of the European Union. And I think that Robert Emmet would be very pleased to, he might not be fully pleased, but he would be very pleased to find Ireland as a member of the European Union, part of the European family, dedicated to the open and pluralist traditions of the European Union, inspired really by the ideas of the Enlightenment, which also inspired the French Revolution and inspired, therefore, the life and work of Robert Emmet and the sacrifice that he made of his life in 1803 in a bid to secure freedom for Ireland. So we have many challenges today. We have the pandemic to cope with. We have the issue of Brexit, which has come back into focus now in a big way, and it's a major challenge for us, and we are very glad to have the support of Irish America as we try to protect the Northern Ireland Protocol and thus protect the Good Friday Agreement. What the Northern Ireland Protocol does is it underlines the distinctive nature of Northern Ireland, in that no other part of the UK has an agreement, an international agreement, the Good Friday Agreement, that determines the arrangements that apply for the governance of Northern Ireland. And that's why Britain leaving the European Union was always going to create issues in Northern Ireland. Those issues can be resolved, I hope will be resolved. The protocol that was signed last year resolves those issues, maintains an open border on the island of Ireland, but it still needs to be implemented, and it needs to be protected from being undermined by legislation that might be passed by the Westminster Parliament that would override the provisions of the Northern Ireland Protocol. So on this day, when we mark the anniversary of the death of Robert Emmet, I think it's important to recognise the strides that Ireland has made in the last 200 years, but also to recognise the challenges we face, not least as a result of the fact that the Northern Ireland Protocol and the border in Ireland has now become an issue again, sadly, and we need to make sure, I'm looking to Irish America to support us in making sure that we can avoid a situation where that border becomes a risk, that border jeopardises the Good Friday Agreement and all that's been achieved over the last 20 odd years with a huge and unstinting support of Irish America. So thank you very much. Gonna mina mágu vasocht vehan seo an jov agus tasulagum gememidin on vlin shakoing Camora Yenov in some form traditionta. Thank you very much, and I hope that we'll be able next year to have our celebration of Robert Emmet in its traditional format. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those encouraging words, Ambassador. I'm now going to ask Sean Culkin, who is the founder and director of the Culkin School of Irish Dancers, to conclude our program with a reading of one of Terry Winch's poems, Rebellion.
Rebellion by Terry Winch. Robert Emmet stands alone on stone all night in bronze on stately Massachusetts Avenue. Bold Robert Emmet, the darling of Erin, his best foot forward, a hand outstretched, complete and whole, as though the foe had never drawn and quartered him. Don't worry, I'm not going to write his epitaph. He took care of that himself. His immortality is rock solid. Dead at 25, yet in form and figure still alive, waiting only for a parade to pass his way again. Fiddle, box, and drum, ready for the victory yet to come. Rebellion by Terry Winch.
Thank you, Sean. And that concludes our program today. I want to again thank all of our readers as well as the ambassador for joining us today in this restricted environment. And as the ambassador said, we certainly fully expect and hope to have a full, open, public ceremony next year. And I also want to make a note of thanks to Keith Carney, of the owner and director of FedNet, for filming us today and helping us post this on the web so that others may view it. Thank you, everybody.